Centuries ago, animals were thought to be unfeeling automatons. The growing science of animal cognition is shattering that assumption. And as evidence of complex emotional lives mounts, it prompts ever bigger questions about how humans interact with creatures big and small. Here to consider some of those, in Washington, D.C., Ross Anderson, senior editor at The Atlantic magazine. In Manchester, New Hampshire, Cy Montgomery, nature writer and author of more than 20 books, including The Soul of an Octopus and The Good, Good Pig. And here in our studio, Daphne Buchsbaum, assistant professor of psychology and principal investigator at the Canine Cognition Lab at the University of Toronto. Noah Miller, assistant professor of psychology and biology at Wilfrid Laurier University. And Kristen Andrews, York Research Chair in Animal Minds and professor of philosophy at York University. And it's great to have everybody both here in our studio and points beyond for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating discussion. Ross, I'm kicking off with you because you did an article, a very nice lengthy piece for the March issue of The Atlantic, and I want to just pull a quote from that to get us started here. So here we go. This idea that animals are conscious was long unpopular in the West, but it has lately found favor among scientists who study animal cognition, and not just the obvious cases, primates, dogs, elephants, whales, and others. Scientists are now finding evidence of an inner life in alien-seeming creatures that evolved on ever more distant limbs of life's tree. For many scientists, the resonant mystery is no longer which animals are conscious, but which are not. Start us off, Ross. Well before the era of Jane Goodall, if I can put it that way, how did we in the West understand the ability of animals to think and feel?
Well, it's a bit of an uneven record, so it's hard to account for, sort of in a single sentence how everyone in the West thought, but generally there was a sense coming out of the kind of Judeo-Christian tradition that animals were sort of much lower on kind of the totem pole of being or the chain of being than human beings. And so, as a result, you had thinkers like Descartes would often refer to animals as automatons, as kind of the way we would think about self-driving cars, able to do really complex behaviors, but really operating on kind of a stimulus and response basis, nothing going on inside.
There is obviously a growing science of animal cognition now, so how much of that belief that you just described has now been called into question?
A great deal, and I'm glad we have some actual experts today with you in the studio who can shed a bit more light on that. But yeah, it's my impression that over the last decade, certainly after the Second World War, where you have lots of really rigorous experimentation around animals, animal behavior being recorded in much greater volumes and in much greater detail. People are starting to think that in fact animals do have minds that, while are not nearly as kind of rich and complex as ours, bear at least some relationship to them.
Cy, I wonder if you'd follow up on that. Tell us how you believe, I guess since Jane Goodall and going forward, how much progress have we made in understanding how animals think since then?
Well, I think there's been a revolution. When Jane Goodall went into the field in Tanzania to study the chimpanzees of Gombe in 1960, her initial reports were not published, even though they were absolutely, totally exciting, and folks said it redefined what was human. She found, for example, that chimpanzees could use tools, and it was thought that only human beings could use tools. But the reason no one wanted to publish her work was that she named her animals and recognized them as individuals. Prior to this, you were supposed to number these animals like rocks. They weren't supposed to be individuals. Today, almost every ethologist who is studying animal behavior in the wild, the very first thing they do is they go out and they figure out which individuals are who. You have to understand the individuality of animals because, as she has shown, and others after her, every individual animal can have as much of an effect on his or her community as every individual person.
Daphne, what would you add to that in terms of characterizing our enhanced understanding of this now?
Yeah, well, I think that Cy mentioned a revolution, and I think that one thing that we can talk about is that in some sense there really was a revolution. So in the 1950s, so prior to that, there was behaviorism. You might have heard of Skinner, and the kind of dominant approach in psychology was to study both animals and, in fact, people as kind of input-output black boxes, that you got some stimulus and you generated some response to it, and either who cared or at least you couldn't study what was happening on the inside. And in the 1950s, what happened was that Noam Chomsky and Marvin Minsky and others started what's been called the cognitive revolution. And that really brought to prominence in science sort of legitimacy for studying internal mental thoughts and representations as kind of a critical part of understanding human behavior and now also animal behavior. And so I think there has been a really big change over that time period.
Kristen, what would you add?
I think that the cognitive revolution and then the Jane Goodall's approach of, you might say, like an anthropological lens on other animals is today really integrating in a way that's super interesting. So Jane Goodall went out and lived with the chimpanzees. She kind of saw what they were doing from the inside, and she allowed us to ask questions about animals that we hadn't been asking before. Like, the observations about using tools led to observations that chimpanzees were making tools, which led to observations that chimpanzees were learning from one another how to make tools, which led us to see that there is culture in chimpanzees and maybe even cumulative culture. And so these sorts of observations, plus the cognitive revolution and the experimental approach in labs, allowed us to go and ask questions about other species. Are other species engaged in social learning? And so we know today, Lars Chitka's work, is that even the bumblebee engages in social learning, and engages in social learning such that there might be something that looks like cumulative culture because they're improving on what they're learning in these technologies.
In which case, Noam, let me turn the question a little more for you. Do you think, even with the advances that you've all made in the last number of decades, do you feel we have anything close to a complete picture of understanding how animals think and feel?
So I don't think so. I don't think we're close to a complete understanding of any of these things. I think there are some very interesting trends that have been emerging over the last couple of decades. Two in particular. One is that we've gotten a lot better recently at exploring and observing the mechanisms inside the brain of what's happening. And just now are starting to be able to actually, in some cases, draw a line from events that are happening in the brain through to actual behaviors and then to actual cognitive skills. And that's something that is, again, still relatively in its infancy, but is definitely developing a lot. The other thing that I think we've been realizing recently over the past couple decades is that the old approach that Daphne described mostly said, let's find general rules that we can apply to all kinds of animals and then just compare across a bunch of different species. And what we've been realizing is that it's often more helpful and definitely more productive to actually look at the various cognitive abilities that animals have evolved to solve the challenges presented by their environments, which are often very different across different species. And that approach has really, as Kristen again was mentioning, has opened up a bunch of explorations into various animal skills that we otherwise would not have seen or even known to look for.
Let's follow up those opening comments by asking our director, Sheldon Osmond, to roll some footage here. We want to show you really quite some extraordinary footage. This is Mama. She is a 59-year-old chimpanzee, and she is on her deathbed. She refused food and water. She barely moved, and then she was visited by an old friend, a biologist by the name of Jan van Hoof. And here was the reaction after she saw him. Sheldon, roll it, please.
Wat is het voor? Ja, vrouwtje, ja. Ja, je bent braaf, je bent braaf. Je bent braaf, jo. Echt waar? Ja.
Now, we should just explain for those who are listening on podcast and who did not get to see that, Mama is completely inert at the beginning. She then sees her old friend, the biologist, and and she becomes completely animated. She begins hugging him, stroking his face, patting the back of his head. It's quite extraordinary footage. Now, that's a chimpanzee. Cy, you spent some time with a giant Pacific octopus. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned about, yes, the emotional life of an octopus?
Well, when I saw that footage, it felt very familiar because I had almost that identical experience with an octopus named Octavia. And I had known her since she had arrived at New England Aquarium in Boston. We had become good friends. It is known that octopuses recognize individual people because they've done experiments showing this. And we were good friends until she laid eggs. When an octopus lays eggs, they spend the rest of their lives just caring for and guarding those eggs. For Octavia, they were not fertile eggs. There was no Mr. Octopus. So 10 months went by that she did not interact with me. And these animals only live 3 to 5 years. So 10 months apart is a long time. It's like decades. Well, when she got old and sick, and Bill Murphy, the aquarist, decided that she should be moved off exhibit to a quieter, darker area, I went in to say goodbye to her because I knew she was dying. And when I lifted up the lid to her tank, she floated up to see me, even though she was sick. She was near the end of her life. This wasn't an easy thing for her to do. And she reached her arms up out of the water and covered my hands and arms with her suckers and looked into my face. And these animals don't eat during the time that they're incubating their eggs. So I offered her a fish. She just took the fish, dropped it to the bottom. She wasn't interested in the fish. She came up to greet me.
Cy, when this happened, what were you thinking?
Well, you know, I was very wrapped up in the moment because this was my friend. And not everyone has a friend who is a mollusk. You know, we're separated from these animals by 500 million years. They are related to clams and snails. Now, chimpanzee is so closely related to a human, you can get a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee. But an octopus, this is an almost alien form of creature. So what struck me as I thought about this moment, Octavia and me together, was how different we were. You know, she has no bones. She can pour herself through a tiny opening. She tastes with her skin. She has 3 hearts and blue blood, can change color and shape. And yet, I have a friend who's an octopus. And we knew each other. I don't know what affection felt like to her, but she clearly wanted to be with me and see me, and chose to do that when she was tired and sick and dying. And that's extremely meaningful to me.
Amazing. Daphne, give me one of your favorite examples of that may give us some insight into the emotional window of animals.
Yeah, well, there's so many interesting things to talk about, but I can bring up, I guess, actually 2 things so I do research on dogs, as I think you mentioned, that dog owners very frequently ask me about. So one of them is, does my dog really love me? Or that comes up all the time, right? Or has he just learned that if he acts like he loves me and he jumps all over me and looks really glad to see me, he's gonna get a lot of treats, right? And so to that one, I think we can say that the research suggests that there's good evidence that your dog does really love you and have an emotional attachment to you. So there's a lot of research suggesting that dogs show attachment behaviors to their owners that are very similar to those that children show to parents, and that they act differently towards owners than other strangers or even other familiar people. And there's also beginning to be evidence that their hormonal reactions, right, the underlying functions generating those emotions may be similar. So you may have heard of oxytocin as a sort of bonding hormone. Dogs actually generate oxytocin when they're sort of looking lovingly into their owner's eyes, and the owner generates oxytocin in response. Now, on the other hand, the other one that owners often ask me about is, you know, I really know that when my dog has done something bad and I come home, he looks so guilty, right? He knows. He knows. And there's even a whole set of YouTube memes about this, of people filming their guilty dog. And a really great researcher who's also written some books, Alexandra Horowitz at Barnard College, who studies dogs, wanted to investigate this. When we have this strong intuition that our dog is guilty, are they? And so she set up a very simple experiment where dogs were given the opportunity to steal food, and they either did or didn't. And then she either told their owners either way that the dog stole food or not. And it turns out that when the dog looks guilty is when you think the dog stole food. And so what you're probably actually seeing is a lot of appeasement and submission behavior. That the dog is looking at you and going, I don't know what you're mad about, but you're really mad. And I'm not even saying that dogs can't feel guilt, but that's a case where our human perception of what's going on with them isn't always accurate to what's actually going on for them internally.
That is really something. Ross, you got a favorite story you want to share?
I do. Actually, even before I wrote this piece, I had occasion to do a pretty deep dive of research into elephant behavior. And one of the things that struck me over that research was not just deaths, but births. And this is not, obviously there are a ton of examples of elephant to human interactions that are really rich and emotional. But this is just even elephant to elephant, which is where I imagine that animal emotional life is even more developed. And when new calves are born in the wild, sort of like the big troop of elephants kind of coming over and like hooting and almost stamping and celebrating the birth of a baby elephant, or like the really well documented grieving behaviors where when an older elephant dies, they sometimes will bury them with sort of sticks and leaves, and they'll kind of attend what almost looks, to an anthropomorphic eye like a funeral. All this kind of stuff is, I think, really suggestive that there's a lot more going on than first meets the eye when it comes to animal emotions.
Kristen, tell us about a dolphin named Phoenix.
So I love this story because it shows you how important it is for us to have relationships with the animals when we're studying them, and that they respond so much better when we have these relationships. Phoenix was a dolphin who lived in the Koala Basin Marine Mammal Laboratory in the 90s. Lou Herman was doing communication research for bottlenose dolphins. And Akei Kamai was Phoenix's friend and tank mate. And Akei Kamai was taught a gestural language. So she had a trainer who stood up in front of her, would ask her to do things like tail touch the surfboard. And then Akei Kamai would go out and do the behavior, come back, get a fish, get a lot of applause and attention. Phoenix was being taught a different kind of language. She was being taught a vocal language, but since humans can't make very good dolphin sounds, this vocal language was presented on a speaker that was put in the water. And instead of having a human to interact with as a communicative partner, Phoenix had a speaker made of PVC pipes in the water. Phoenix did not like that. Phoenix would go and start to attack the speaker after a while when it was placed into the tank. And the experiment just completely failed when it came to Phoenix. And so they stopped doing this research with Phoenix, but they kept doing it with Akei Kamai because it was working so well. Phoenix would then go and intervene in Akei Kamai's experiments. I don't know what she was feeling. Was she envious? Was she spiteful? But she was unhappy. She was clearly unhappy with what was going on. And so my job when I was there was to cuddle Phoenix and occupy her so Akei Kamai could be tested. And we just hung out together and pet each other. She'd put her pec fin up. I'd put my elbow out. We'd cuddle, gaze into each other's eyes. And I felt like Phoenix was my friend. We had this relationship. And because we had this relationship, it was worth not going and expressing whatever anger she had towards Akei Kamai. Poor Phoenix.
Fascinating. Noam, I want you to talk to us about zebrafish and the notion that they apparently can get depressed.
Right.
How do you know that?
Well, so that's a very interesting question, and I think it's important to get into the details of some of these experiments. One of the ways so zebrafish, they're very small pet store fish, and they're used a lot in molecular biology, developmental biology, and they're used a lot for drug discovery. So you can test a bunch of substances on them, and the way they react tells us a lot about how humans are going to react to those same drugs, which is in itself very interesting. And so when you want to study depression, potentially, in zebrafish, the first thing you have to do is you have to make some depressed zebrafish. And the way you do that is by doing what's called uncontrollable mild stress. So a couple times a week throughout their lifetimes, you present them with some event that they dislike, like being handled or being restrained, or presenting the odor of something that might be a predator. And you do that at unpredictable times every so often over a period of time, which is supposed to be analogous to growing up under uncertain conditions where you never know when you're going to get fed or who's going to beat you up. That kind of analogy. What you can then do is you can test them to see whether they're depressed or not. And again, you can't ask a fish, how are you feeling? Fish, in fact, have very limited ways of expressing what they're doing, because they can move their bodies around, they can put their fins out, they can open and close their mouths. That's about it. The standard way for measuring whether fish are depressed is just you put them in a tank and you see whether they spend time near the top of the tank, which is supposed to be exploring their environment, or if they're down near the bottom of the tank, just kind of hiding out. And one of the important things to realize about this is not the only measure, but one of the important things to realize about this is it's a very coarse measure. As opposed to, say, if you were a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist trying to evaluate whether a human was depressed, you would go through a much wider range of measures to figure out whether this actually qualifies as depression. So we say that the zebrafish get depressed, and maybe they do. There are certainly some analogies between what's happening to the zebrafish and what's happening with humans. There's an interesting aspect, which is that some of these behaviors that the zebrafish demonstrate go away when you give them antidepressant drugs. Same kinds of antidepressant drugs that work on humans.
Incredible.
Zebrafish are vertebrates, just like we are. And so, again, what that tells you is that some of the mechanisms that are going on in our brains are very, very similar.
Well, let's talk about intelligence here for a second. And Ross, I'm going to pluck some more examples out of the article that you did for The Atlantic. For example, apparently we now know that elephants can classify humans by age, gender, and language. Sperm whales engage in consensus-based decision-making. Octopuses, yes, that is apparently the plural, not octopi. Octopuses use coconut shells as tools. Ravens can plan for the future. And what we heard earlier, lab-bound honeybees can learn to recognize abstract concepts, including similar to, different from, and zero. Okay, so I want to go to you again on this because you talked to us about your experience with the octopus. I want to talk about a different animal, including a 750-pound pig named Christopher Hogwood. Tell us about Christopher.
Well, he was certainly smarter than we were because he had us working for him 24/7. He was just a great big Buddha master, a fabulous pig. Now, pigs, even though a lot of people think of them as simply the side next to your eggs in the morning, they're very smart, and people have compared their intelligence to dogs. They figure out all kinds of things. And one of the things that Christopher was very good at figuring out was how to get out of his pen. He liked his pen fine, but he liked social interaction. And he would thread his flexible nose disc and his lips through the slats of his gate. And he was able to move the latch, which wasn't just a latch that moved to one side. You had to flip it and then move it. Then he would remove the bungee cords that we had on top of that, and he'd let himself out, and he'd go visit his neighbors. And he also was he had great social intelligence, great emotional intelligence. He remembered people. For years, he'd see someone once and remember them years later. One of his friends was a guy named Ray, and he loved Ray. Ray weighed 300 pounds, so I think he kind of felt like this guy knows where all the food is. Well, he met Ray once, did not see him for years. The next time Ray came back, he gave him this lavish greeting. And another thing he did, he understood. I have a number of friends who use wheelchairs. And even though Christopher Hogwood loved to knock over the wood pile and he loved to wreck stuff, you would think it would be a ton of fun to knock over someone in a wheelchair. But he knew not to do that. And he was also very tender with a little friend of mine who was 14, named Kelly, who had brain cancer, who was quite frail. And yet her parents knew that they could leave Kelly with Christopher, 750 pounds, with great long tusks, and that he would be absolutely tender with her and look after her.
Okay, we have looked at the emotional component of this story. We have looked at the intelligence component of this story. Kristen, get us started in some conversation now about whether you think animals have consciousness.
Well, can I define consciousness first?
Please do.
I found that this is a really helpful thing to do. Consciousness can be understood as an umbrella term. So we all think, consciousness is all of this stuff, like me thinking about myself, and am I self-conscious in front of people? But then there's another sense of consciousness that is not as reflective. It's just feeling things. Sometimes that's described as sentience. So I feel cold, I feel pain, I feel happy, I feel joyous. I feel the heat of the sun on my skin. All of this counts under this large umbrella of consciousness. So if we want to ask a question about whether other animals are conscious, or we're interested in this issue, we might be better off starting with this idea, this question, are other animals sentient? Do other animals feel things? And then once we've got that established, we can ask these more complicated questions about kinds of consciousness. Do animals have self-reflective mental states where they think about their thoughts? Do they have emotional states of guilt that are more sophisticated than wanting something? So,
do we have answers to those questions yet?
I think we definitely have answers to whether other animals have sentience, have feelings. And part of this has to do with the host of research that's been done on animal pain experience, I think Noam's going to talk about. But I'm really interested in this question of how we understand, why we take other humans to be conscious. And because we don't know, right? I see you and I treat you like you're conscious, but I don't feel your consciousness. So what is it about what you're doing that makes me think you're conscious? Is it, like some people argue, that you can say, this is how I feel? I don't think so, for two reasons. And one is that when kids first say, I want this, I feel this way, we're not like, oh, wow, you're conscious. All of a sudden, now I believe you're conscious. We thought they were conscious all along. And the other worry is that we're going to soon have robots that can say, I feel like playing another game of Go today. And are we going to then take that as definitive evidence that they're conscious? So it's all of these markers and behaviors that we see young children, our dogs, our octopuses that we're friends with, the rats that we interact with, as evidence that they feel things, that they're experiencing things. It's the eye contact, it's the contingencies in our interaction with one another, it's the expressions of emotions. There's a way in which we just perceive the mentality of other beings. And so there's no question that others feel.
Add something to that, Daphne, if you will.
I would love to add quite a bit to that, actually. So I do think that one of the challenges there that I wanted to circle back to is that a lot of these examples we find really compelling are examples where we feel or see that we think that the animal is experiencing something very akin to what we experience as an adult human. And we find that really compelling. Oh, their emotion of, grief, or their behavior in the face of grief or joy seems so like ours. But I think part of this question is, can animals, and even for instance, very young children, they may be having a rich, subjective experience in the world that we should take seriously, that's not at all like ours, and that doesn't make it less valuable or interesting, right? I think we have this very human tendency to look at what's special about us and do other animals have it, right? So for coming back to this question of intelligence, we point to things like tool use and behavioral flexibility, or we look at our ability to use language and say, well, that must make us very special because we don't see other animals talking. But bats can echolocate, right? And dogs can sniff out a cancer cell in I don't even know how many millionths of dilution. Those are very unique skills, and they're based on perceptual abilities that may be very different from our own. So I think it's really interesting and valuable to examine the ways that animals are similar to us, but also not to discount the ways in which their experience of the world may be fundamentally different from ours. And coming back to some of these more sophisticated markers we often associate with consciousness. So for humans, we often talk about what's called sort of mental time travel. So the idea is that one of the ways in which we think people have a sense of themselves is that they can think of themselves as kind of a single entity existing through time. I can reflect on what happened to me in the past. I can plan for and predict what might happen to me in the future, and that requires thinking about me and my personal experiences. But we don't even think, or we don't know, it's an open research question, the extent to which very young children have that experience in the way that we do as adults. But as Kristen alluded to, we don't then, or in modern times, point to young children and say, well, until you can experience episodic memory and future planning, you're not really conscious. Yes. And so, we want to be careful if we're holding that up. That may be a bar that's too high or too specific in many ways.
Sure. Let me get Noam, since you suggested he had something to say about pain. Why don't you come on in on that angle?
Sure. So there are interesting examples about pain in fish, for example. One of the most interesting examples of this was done by Victoria Braithwaite, was showing that if you do something that would cause pain in us to certain fish, so one of the things that they do is they inject this unpleasant substance, it's like distilled bee venom, into the lips of the fish. The fish then they behave as if they are in pain, in a way that if we were behaving that way, we would certainly experience pain. And again, similarly to the other fish example before, if you give these fish painkillers, painkillers that work on humans, that also has an effect on how they behave relative to the pain. I think, however, the interesting point of consciousness, and I think what Kristen and Daphne have sort of been pointing towards, what I think is happening today in consciousness research is that we're realizing that consciousness is not a single thing, that you can break it down into a number of different abilities or kinds of processes that are going on, much like what happened with language research. We used to say, well, animals don't have language, or animals do have language. And what we then realized is that language is not a thing. Language is a whole suite of things. And some of those we share with a whole bunch of other species, and some of those maybe we share with fewer species, and maybe some of those are unique to humans. And I think the same thing is happening with consciousness, where we realize that maybe animals are sentient, maybe they feel things, maybe animals can perceive things, maybe animals can learn, maybe animals can process things. All of those we have pretty good evidence for. And most of those are components of consciousness. And so maybe animals have consciousness, but it's not a consciousness that looks like ours. Maybe it's got different components than ours does.
Well, let me try this follow-up with Sai. Clearly, through your experience, you have told us that animals feel deeply. But do you get the sense that they, for example, that octopus that you talked about earlier, Octavia, I guess, do you know whether Octavia felt that she was dying as opposed to just sad or sick?
Well, she certainly knew she didn't feel well. But I often wonder if we always know that we're dying. We don't necessarily know because we've never done it before. So...
I don't know. I've done it on this show a few times. But,
and people don't come back to talk about it, right? So I know she didn't feel well. But with octopuses, what's so interesting is a lot of them live a solitary existence. So what she knew, she didn't learn from her mother, for example. A lot of stuff is also given to us humans. We have instincts as well. But consciousness is adaptive. We know that because it's adaptive in our lives. So why shouldn't other animals have it? Why should it arise de novo in one species alone? That seems kind of crazy to me.
Let's do one more excerpt from Ross's article in The Atlantic. Here we go. Fish pain is something different from our own pain. In the elaborate mirrored hall that is human consciousness, pain takes on existential dimensions. Because we know that death looms and grieve for the loss of richly imagined futures, it's tempting to imagine that our pain is the most profound of all suffering. Ross, having studied this now as much as you have, do you think our pain is the most profound of all suffering?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, I do think that we are at the very beginning of a really long process that kind of has two prongs to it. One is really figuring out what the kind of qualitative nature of animal suffering is like, and across the very many animal species that there are. And then I think a larger project, which is a sort of cultural and philosophical project, of deciding how we kind of value animal pain and suffering, which is to say, how much do we think we ought to go out of our way to make sure that it doesn't occur, or at least doesn't occur by our own hand. But I would stress that despite what I might have said in the piece, I think we're still at the very, very beginning of that process.
All right, with just a few minutes to go here, let's finish on this. Daphne, I'll go to you first. What does this, all of what we've talked about over the last almost 40 minutes here, what does it all mean for, in your view, how we should treat animals?
I think that's a great question, and I think that this relates to what Ross brought up. So kind of related to this question of the cognitive revolution, it wasn't that long ago when we didn't even give infants anesthesia before surgery because they couldn't yet talk and articulate feelings and say, as Kristen said, I want this or I think that, we thought that they didn't have them. Right, and obviously we've radically changed our thoughts on that. We think that infants have a lot of experience of the world, including pain. And so, I think that we have learned enough to say from what Noam pointed to and others that almost every animal species that exists reacts, in a pain-like manner to aversive stimuli and has a perceptual experience of the world, and we need to take that seriously. I guess one thing I do want to say about that is that we want to treat animals ethically, but we also do, again, want to be aware of what that means for that animal. So there have been, for instance, cases where people with very well-intentioned approaches try to make an animal's conditions better in the way that's would have been better if the human were that animal. So a specific case I'm thinking of is with free-range chickens, that there's actually been a lot of research that the chickens, not that they should be all packed in together, but that they want to be close to other chickens. That if people actually did an experiment where you take the chickens, they have enough room to run around, you put them next to the other chicken, or you move them far away. The chicken who's moved far away will choose to go back to the other chickens. So when we think about treating the animals, especially domesticated animals we have responsibility for ethically, part of that means giving them the sort of experience that's natural to that animal and give that animal the sort of most enjoyable, least painful life for its sort of species typical behaviors.
Gotcha. Sai, I'm down to my last minute. How do you think this should affect how we treat animals going forward?
Well, I think, one, our understanding of consciousness will expand thanks to this. And it's my hope that our feeling of compassion will expand as well. Once we know that animals are thinking, feeling, and knowing, we owe them the best life we can give them. And that's within our grasp.
That's a great place to leave this. Can I thank our two guests who are on the line in Points Beyond in the United States. Ross Anderson, whose work you can read in The Atlantic, the March edition on this. He's coming to us today from Washington, D.C. Sy Montgomery, 20 books. Pick one. They're all great. Manchester, New Hampshire is where she's been today. There's Noam Miller, assistant professor of psychology and biology at Wilfrid Laurier University. Kristen Andrews, who's got the York Research Chair in Animal Minds and associate professor of philosophy at York University. Actually, you're a full professor now, aren't you? York University, right on. And Daphne Buchsbaum, assistant professor, psychology, University of Toronto, principal investigator at the Canine Cognition Lab at the University of Toronto. Great to have all of you on TVO tonight. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.